which changes the landscape of everything. I mean, for the first time in years, there's no real championship favorite to start the year. Anything can happen, and there's a ton of teams with a chance to win it all. But not every team was so lucky, which is why we still have some losers. But I will say there actually was a lot more winners during free agency. So we'll look at the losers first, and then finish the video by looking at the winners, so we can end things off on a good note. To get started, we will say that the Cavs, Bucks, Pistons, Nuggets, Hawks, Spurs, Kings, Rockets, Wizards, and Bulls neither won or lost because they didn't make enough significant moves. But with that said, the first loser is the Charlotte Hornets, because they chose not to trade Kemba the past 2 years, and then in free agency they end up having to do a sign and trade for him anyways, with him and Terry Rozier straight up, which is technically the worst possible trade they could have got for him. Don't get me wrong, I still got faith in Rozier, but all of this was a terrible execution and shows why Charlotte has never been a great team. Plus they flat out just lost Jeremy Lamb and Frank Kaminsky without getting anything in return. And then there's the New York Knicks, who couldn't have possibly done worse this offseason, and no matter how far from now it gets, whenever you look back at this time for the Knicks, it's always going to be one of the most laughable instances of a team coming up short in any sports history. They flat out gave up on Kristaps Porzingis, and rumors even suggest that they turned down a meeting with Kawhi Leonard because they were expecting Zion, KD, and Kyrie, but instead ended up with Taj, Randall, Portis, and Payton. I mean, with this, the Knicks should really no longer be thought of as a top tier team, with the likes of the Celtics and the Lakers, because year after year they failed to live up to expectations. The Orlando Magic were also clear losers because they re-signed Nikola Vucevic to a max deal. They should have traded him a long time ago to clear way for Mo Bamba to develop, but now that may never even happen. I don't know if winning one playoff game against the Raptors gave them some sort of false confidence, but they should be rebuilding right now, not re-signing players to max contracts who are in their prime. Plus, they still didn't even get a quality point guard. And then we have to include the Toronto Raptors because they lost their superstar in Kawhi Leonard. Can we just take a minute though to appreciate what an alpha move this was by Kawhi? Gets traded to the Raptors, casually wins them a championship, and then willingly leaves the team because he has so much confidence in his ability to do the same thing for the Clippers. And even though Toronto are losers here, they can't be mad because they knew they were only getting Leonard for one guaranteed year. The Suns' #1 mission this offseason was to get a point guard, and they had a high pick in the draft to be able to do so, but instead traded down to bring in Dario Saric, drafted 2 decent young players, straight up gave away TJ Warren for cash, and then once free agency started they signed Ricky Rubio and also gave away Josh Jackson in order to do so. I mean, giving away 2 young players and only signing Rubio out of all of the young point guards that were available definitely makes them losers in my mind. And the next is a controversial one because I'm putting the Celtics as losers, but just slightly. Now, Kyrie Irving leaving wasn't the team's fault because that was his own personal thing. And then they did pull off the great move, getting a sign and trade swapping Terry Rozier for Kemba Walker, on top of also getting Enes Kanter to start for only $5 million a year. But the team lost out on Marcus Morris as well as Al Horford, getting nothing back in return. And that's a lot of losses for this team overall. And now they're stuck in this weird area of having a couple of solid young players and a couple of solid players in their prime. Personally, I think they would have been better off just going one way or the other, so I'm putting them as losers for now. The Timberwolves are also losers because the only thing they've really done so far is lose out on Derrick Rose. Maybe if they trade Andrew Wiggins for something good in return before the season starts, then I wouldn't have a problem changing them to winners. And speaking of winners, we can move on to them, starting with the Brooklyn Nets, who've got to be either the first or second biggest overall winners in the league this offseason, because early on they not only got rid of Allen Crabbe's big contract, but they got Taurean Prince in return, who's still got some potential. Then signed Kyrie, Durant, and DeAndre Jordan all at once, which means they may have lost out on D'Angelo Russell and their young core that they had just a couple of months ago, but no team in the league would turn down these 3 guys to keep a young core together. Well, maybe the Knicks. The Knicks would make that kind of decision, but almost nobody else would. The Indiana Pacers also made some solid moves and switched things up. They did lose out on Thaddeus Young and Bojan Bogdanovic, which is going to be a big hit for them on both ends, but it also means that Domantas Sabonis may get his opportunity to start, and they added Jeremy Lamb and Malcolm Brogdon, which was a great way to make up for it. I mean, they needed to do something to switch things up, and this was a great start, especially considering the amount of potential that I think Brogdon still has. And that's not even to mention the fact that they basically got TJ Warren from the Suns for free. The Miami Heat were winners, and I still expect them to make a couple more moves before next season. For now though, they finally got rid of Hassan Whiteside's contract in exchange for a solid backup center in Myers Leonard, who's probably going to be a better fit in that role. And then of course they traded Josh Richardson for Jimmy Butler, which, as we've seen, adding Jimmy will almost automatically make this a playoff team. I wish they would have been able to hold on to Richardson, but I still would have made that trade any day. And it was great for Miami because these were exactly the type of moves that they needed to make and that I wanted to see from them. I mean, they fixed their salary cap issues, their depth issues, and brought themselves a star. And while we're on the subject of Jimmy Butler, that leads us into the next winners this offseason in the 76ers. The team lost JJ Redick, but he caused defensive issues anyways, and like I said, lost Jimmy Butler, but instead of just flat out losing him, they found a great trade. They retained Tobias Harris and then shockingly signed Al Horford to a near max deal in a move that was really made out of nowhere. Definitely makes this the most stacked starting five in the league, and especially with the Raptors out of the picture and KD being out with an injury this year, you gotta believe that gives this team a near guaranteed finals appearance. A team I wasn't so sure were winners though was the Dallas Mavericks. Mainly because even though they were able to convince Kristaps to stay, they didn't really sign the quality role players that I expected them to. They missed out on Kemba, and right now their starting five is looking like it'll be Seth Curry, Hardaway Jr. or Finney Smith at shooting guard, Luka Doncic, Porzingis, and Boban at center. It's not the worst, but I thought they would do a little bit more. Then the Golden State Warriors are clearly winners. Getting D'Angelo Russell for KD when they should have gotten nothing in return was a huge win. The only downside though was losing out on Iguodala, but I mean basically trading him for a max player is always going to be a win. Plus, adding Willie Cauley-Stein on a near minimum deal means that this team is still a real threat in the Western Conference. And then we have the Los Angeles Clippers. Kawhi Leonard joining the Clippers was like a season finale level swerve. It was rumored that he ruled out the Clippers and instead was in deep talks with the Lakers. And then he had everyone in the NBA desperately hoping that he wasn't going to go there and they weren't going to get another dominant big three right when the Warriors broke up. Then at the last minute, not only gives us one of the biggest plot twists in recent memory, but the Clippers created a super team of their own, giving them Paul George and Kawhi Leonard in their primes. And they're going to be good for a long time, so the picks that they had to give up for PG aren't going to matter too much for the next few years. And it's just crazy, because I mean in my 10 greatest what ifs video that I made just a couple of months ago, one of them was what if the Pacers never traded Kawhi Leonard on draft night, and the fact that we would get to see himself and PG-13 team up. And now we're actually going to get to see that happen this year. And all of this, plus keeping their core group together, is what in my opinion, gave them the best offseason out of anyone this year. And speaking of a former OKC player, that brings us to the Thunder. And even though they lost their superstar and are trying to trade Westbrook, I still have them as big time winners. Because they got a great deal for George, and even better than that, they recognized the fact that it was time for them to start things over. I mean, they were stacked up against the salary cap this year, and they couldn't improve the team anymore, plus they had been losing in the first round, so there really wasn't too much more they could do. They're already winners, but if they can find a solid trade for Russ, they'll be that much better off. I really don't know if they'll be able to find a trade though, and it'll be even harder to find one to get young assets in return like they want. I mean, they're looking to trade a ball dominant point guard in the middle of his prime that needs a system put around him for it to work. The only few teams that come to mind that could make a trade happen are the Heat, Magic, and Pistons. The Magic have the most young assets to give up, but a Westbrook trade wouldn't really make sense. The Pistons still desperately need a point guard, and I'm sure would do whatever it takes to get Westbrook. But right now the Heat look most likely to land him, and they could offer a package revolving around a guy like Justice Winslow. So there are a couple of possible scenarios out there, we'll just have to wait and see what happens. But then the Los Angeles Lakers are also big winners this offseason. Some people might disagree based on the fact that they didn't get a third star or too many quality role players thanks to Kawhi's master plan, but that's looking at the glass half empty. They were still able to land Quinn Cook, who has potential, Danny Green, DeMarcus Cousins, and Anthony Davis all in one offseason. It might not be what they or everyone else was expecting, but given the situation, that's a lot of great players. And then changing gears, the Memphis Grizzlies very quietly became one of the biggest winners out of everyone with all the moves they made. First, they landed Ja Morant, traded Mike Conley for Kyle Korver, Jake Crowder, Grayson Allen, and 2 first-round picks, then got rid of Chandler Parsons' terrible contract, got Josh Jackson, who's not too much to be happy about, but they got him for next to nothing. And the same with Andre Iguodala, who they basically landed because they had the salary space to take his contract on. So he'll be a huge trade asset this year. And then they created salary space by trading for Dwight Howard and waiving him right away. Memphis has been making some power moves, and it's made all these under the radar deals that's leading them to a bright future coming up. Another bright future is the Pelicans, who we already know make it here because of the Lakers trade, but on top of that, they did a great job with getting Derek Favors and JJ Redick. I don't really know how Favors fits in, but I mean, Redick was cheap for them, and his shooting the space out the floor with a team of not so great shooters is going to be huge. It's going to help them run plays, open up the floor for these young guys, and most importantly, give them another locker room leader. Then a team that I didn't think was going to be able to make any moves this season made some great ones in the Portland Trail Blazers. They basically swapped Evan Turner for Kent Bazemore in the deal that I wish they made years ago, because it gives Portland the perfect 3-and-D player for their system. And then they traded for Hassan Whiteside, which helps out huge because they've been desperate for help off the bench and only had to give up Mo Harkless and Myers Leonard to get it. And that'll even free up almost $30 million of cap space next year. I will say though, a team who may want to free up cap space even more is the Cavs. And they just so happen to have Kevin Love on a $30 million a year contract. So Whiteside for Kevin Love could be the perfect trade for both teams. And then finally, the last winner is the Utah Jazz. And I love what Utah was able to do this year. They let a few guys walk, but got Mike Conley in a major improvement at point guard, and really didn't have to give up too much for him. Then got a top tier wing defender and solid scorer on offense in Bojan Bogdanovic, and signed Jeff Green and Ed Davis. They'll be playing small with Bojan at the 4, but I think they play better with a stretch 4 anyways. So now their 5 is Mike Conley, Donovan Mitchell, Joe Ingles, Bojan, and Rudy Gobert. And for a team that didn't make too many moves during the regular season, it was great to see them change things up so much in the offseason. But that's going to wrap things up. Comment down below if your team turned out to be a winner or a loser, and who you're most excited to see next season. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and I'll catch you next video.